Bonjour, Willy Mix to review the Softube Germanium compressor, an emulation of the Chandler Limited Germanium compressor. I will explain you quickly the features so you're not lost. So we got an input knob, which is basically you push into it, you got more saturation, more compression. You got a sidechain here that you need to activate here, otherwise it doesn't work. So it's a sidechain EQ to filter the bass out of the detector. Then we got the ratio, you know it, and the compression curve. So the compression curve is basically the knee. So the more you go to the right, the harder the knee will be, and the more harmonics you will get. So signal will get dirtier. So the R is like the most gentle and the cleanest of all of them. It's more classic resistance circuits, whereas for instance the silicon hard got 2 diodes, or even the germanium medium, which has 5 germanium diodes plus the diodes from the germanium soft. So you can see it's very different from like a simple resistance circuits. Then we got a mix wet dry, attack and release, and the germanium drive and feedback. So they both control the output of the compressor, and it's a bit similar to the germanium preamp that we got as studio. So they both control the amount of output gain. The germanium drive controls the output volume, but it also saturates, and the feedback is different. It's the negative feedback, which is when the output is fed back into the input, like a 1023, and it's 3 discrete gain blocks. So it affects the THD. The more you push it, the more THD, and the frequency response also. Like a 1023, when you push into it, you got more mid-range and softer highs, more compression on the highs, and more saturation. It's the same here pretty much. If you put the feedback to 0, you will have more high-end, less THD, less gain, and so a cleaner signal. And the opposite, if you push it to 10, you got more bass, you reduce the high-end, and you will add more THD. That's basically what it is. And last thing, you got clean comp and dirty comp, which is basically multiplying by 10 the amount of THD. So in clean comp is 0.2 to 0.5% of THD, and you multiply by 10, it's 2 or 5% in dirty comp, because the FET compressor are very dirty, and this one is a FET compressor, yeah, I forget to mention. And one last cool thing, you got the output, which is not included in the outboard, and it's plugin exclusive, so you can play with those two and still level match properly. Okay, so let's now jump right into some examples with a mixbus setting. So it's a very clean one, very soft attack and release, and so just to show you the sound of the units. Since we got the feedback around here, it will have a kind of high-end boost, so you will expect that. Alright, so let's listen to it. It's a basic rock song that is not even the real mix. As you can see, I had to deactivate a lot of tracks, so bear with me, it's not a final mix or anything. Anyway, it has been recorded in a garage with a €300 Focusrite interface, and everything's through Softube tape. Right, so now you know. Let's listen to it.
Yeah, I am sorry. I wish you could have helped me. I'm sorry. Shouting out your name. Yeah. Oh, I am sorry. I wish you could have helped me. Oh, I am sorry. Shouting out your name.
So you could really hear how the high end was more prominent and how it pushed the high frequencies up. So I will let you listen back to it and focus on the vocal and the snare.
Yeah, I am sorry. I wish you could have helped me. I'm sorry. Shouting out your name. Yeah. Oh, I am sorry.
It's pretty obvious, but let's try another setting, a dirtier setting this time. So we got a bit more feedback, but we are in dirty comp mode, a lower ratio and different attack and release, and playing with a sidechain. So let's listen to that, see how it sounds.
Yeah, I am sorry. I wish you could have helped me. I'm sorry. Shouting out your name. Yeah. Oh, I am sorry. I wish you could have helped me. Oh, I am sorry. Shouting out your name.
Alright, so it sounded a bit grittier. It sounded almost muddy in a way, but it works perfectly for the kind of very bright sound that needs that low-mid reinforcement. So it's the same sound but dirtier, so a bit more cohesive in a way. But let's try a last setting on the mixbus, which is in fact a setting given with the plugin done by Michael Brauer. It's dirtier, even more dirtier, and it's in parallel this time, so let's listen to it.
Yeah, I am sorry. I wish you could have helped me. I'm sorry. Shouting out your name. Yeah. Oh, I am sorry. I wish you could have helped me. Oh, I am sorry. Shouting out your name. It's been years now, but I can still feel it somehow.
Yeah, so it doesn't fit the mix here because it makes it very imprecise and in the low end, especially because the bass sounds quite bad here. But I think it works really well, and almost like an EQ, it gives more low end saturation. It's very enjoyable, especially when it gets to the verse. It was really cool. And speaking of which, let's go to the bass and see what I did with the bass here. So for the bass, it's basically a little more feedback again. The goal was to keep it together. So let's listen to it in solo and after in context. Yeah, you see, it's quite cool. It holds it down together. Maybe a different attack and release will be better for this track. Let's listen in context and see what it does.
Yeah, I am sorry. I wish you could have helped me. I'm sorry. Shouting out your name. Yeah. Oh, I am sorry. I wish you could have helped me. Oh, I am.
Yeah, so it works without making it louder. It sounds more audible now. So let's focus on one specific area of the bass. Yeah, that part when the bass goes in the upper octave. Let's listen with and without the compressor. Yeah, it does a great job at holding it down and make all the notes at the same level and still adding a little bit of saturation so it fits well to the track. It's quite enjoyable on bass. I think it works. But I think where it truly shines is on guitar. So we got the rhythm guitar here. Let's listen in solo and after in context. Right, in context now.
Oh, I am sorry. I wish you could have helped me. Oh, I am sorry. Shouting out your name.
Let's go back to the beginning of the chorus.
Yeah, I am sorry. I wish you could have helped me. I'm sorry. Shouting out your name. Yeah. Oh, I am sorry. I wish you could have helped me. Oh, I am sorry. Shouting out your name. It's been years.
As you can hear, it's not that loud. You could see on the VU meter that it's not especially louder, but it make them sound fuller. So it's very cool. I really think that's where it shines, to be honest, on those kind of instruments, electric guitars here, for example. And let's go last to the vocal and see how it sounds. So on the vocal, I did something different. I used them in parallel and in series. So it means parallel here and in series because it's one after the other. It's basically the way to do like a 1176 to catch the peaks and a slower compressor after like an LA2A with a high ratio still, because I wanted to push it really to see how it sounds. So let's see what it does. I will bypass the processing here so you got the full vocal sound.
Yeah, I am sorry. I wish you could have helped me. I'm sorry. Shouting out your name, yeah. Oh, I am sorry. I wish you could have helped me. Oh, I am sorry. Shouting out your name.
So you see it really works at bringing the vocal forward, and you can hear this got a kind of 8K boost that could be quite useful sometimes. Try in context.
Yeah, I am sorry. I wish you could have helped me. I'm sorry. Shouting out your name, yeah. Oh, I am sorry. I wish you could have helped me. Oh, I am sorry. Shouting out your name.
Works quite well at putting the vocal forward and a bit above the mix with that AK boost, especially, even though there is a high-end boost. I pushed the feedback a lot, so it's supposed to attenuate the high-end a bit, but it's part of the sound of the unit, that high-end excitement, which is quite cool. Here it's maybe a bit too much because of those other processors that have been put on the track before I tried this one here. Now let's try on another type of music if you're not that much into rock music. So let's try on something a bit more electronic. Alright, this is another kind of music. I will just start by bypassing all the Germanium instance in the mix. There is one on the drum bus, one on the bass 808 bus, one on the Synth Keys, which is kind of a lead but doing chords, and one on the mixbus. So let's see how it sounds with and without those instances. Look closely here. Alright, so it sounds a bit louder too, but it sounds more glued to me. It sounds quite cool, even if it's not a real mix and it's missing a lot of stuff. Anyway, let's focus now on the mix bus. It makes it tighter and a bit rounder, so you will see how it sounds. Let's try with and without. Quite cool what it's doing to the transients on the drums, and at the same time how it brings the keys to the same level as the rest, like gluing. What everyone says gluing, it's basically what I hear in this case. Let's now go to the drum bus, to the drum machine bus. So it's pretty compressed, like the example, so you will see how it sounds in solo and after in context. Let's listen back now. I'll level match a little bit more. Yeah, it's quite cool. It's a tad louder though. Still you can hear what it does. And here I can recognize the hardware behavior. It's not an outboard that I used a lot, but I used it a little bit, still quite a bit. And I can recognize that sticky kind of obviously compressed sound on the drums that the outboard got, and here I can really hear that, so it's pretty cool. I like it like this, but it could be a bit too much, and if it's a bit too much you can just dial back the mix knob and you got a mix of both, which is quite great. I mean, we can try now, maybe it will change the level balance, but we can try that. Yeah, it sounds maybe a bit better, but it was also a lot louder with the mix knob dialed back. So now let's go to the bass 808 thing. I used this one to add more volume presence to the 808 and evening both 808 and bass synths at the same time to have a more consistent sound. So it lets you listen to what it does. The 808 will sound a lot louder, which is the goal, really. Alright, so you can hear it's a lot louder. Let's see in context. So it's pretty cool. It does the job that I wanted it to do, which is lowering the bass things a bit and putting more emphasis on the 808s. The saturation adds a bit to give more fatness to the sound, although I would like you to be very cautious to use this compressor on sub-heavy material, because it reminds me a little bit of also the Chandler Limited Zener I got at the studio, which is the same. It tends to fart a little bit with tracks with a lot of sub informations. I feel that with this one it's better, although it's a bit trickier to set up with those kind of sounds, so it can really messes up everything if you don't do it properly. Now at last, let's listen to the keys. So you see I repeated the first chord so you can hear the difference because the synths are modulating quite a lot. I like what it does, like let's see in context to see how it feels. You see, I stop here to tell you, you see it sounds fatter and more consistent, and if you look at the VU, it's even louder without it, so it's quite cool. Quite nice, right? I think it works really well here, and it was doing a similar thing to the guitars in the last mix we tried, which makes it fatter, fuller and bigger, whatever word you want to use. And it fits better to the track. It's more even, and at the same time it's more enjoyable to listen to, and the saturation and low mids and low end information it adds is very nice. So it's something I really like about it. Alright, so that leads me to the conclusion of this video, pros and cons. So we'll start with the good thing, the thing I like about it, the sound. I really like the sound of this unit. It reminds me a lot of the outboard. Can really sound fat and saturated in a very good way, but it's also a compressor that is not that easy to use. It requires a bit of experimentation and can really messes things up, as I said before, if you don't know what you're doing with it. So be careful, because it can really destroy a mix in a way. If you remember the one we did on the rock track when we used the micro Brauer setting, it did not work at all in this mix. It destroyed the mix in a way, even if the mix was bad to start with anyway, but did some weird things to the low end and all that stuff. So it's not like a compressor that forgives a lot the mistakes. Anyway, I really like the sound of it. I said I was going to say good things about it, so I like also the fact they add the MS options and all that stuff, even if it's not quite common in plugin words to add those kind of stuff. But what I really like is the output, which is plugin exclusive and lets you really tweak the tone while you're level matching the plugin, which is not the thing you can do with the outboard. So it's pretty amazing. Also, another thing is it's super low latency. It's 4 samples latency, and yet it's got very reasonable performance regarding aliasing. So it's pretty nice in that regard. You can use it live if you want for tracking, which is cool. And then I like the GUI, even if it doesn't matter to some people. I think it's very well done. It's a good artwork, and the CPU hit is very low also on my system, and my system can be quite bitchy with Pro Tools and everything doesn't work. This is also something really cool. Now let's jump to the things I don't like about it. It's really being picky, but one thing that bothers me a little bit, it can be sometimes a bit tedious to level match with this output gain, which goes to -24 to +24, and it's very small, so sometimes you can do some big jumps, so it's a bit hard to properly level match if you're a level matching freak as I am. It's not a big problem to anyone anyway. Another problem is, I said the same thing about the Chandler Limited TG12345 EQs in comparison to Softube and the Artboard. I did the same thing. I don't understand why on a mono track it loads in stereo and you can unlink the left and right channel and use them separately. So you got 2 input knob, 2 ratio, 2 attack, 2 release, and they are independent. They are not linked even in mono, so it's a bit weird. I don't understand why it's like this. That's not a big problem to anyone, but yeah, that's something I noticed that can be problematic. But if you linked everything in the channels, it just works and you're done. And the last thing, the price point can be a bit stiff, especially if you compare to other brands that destroyed the markets like Slate Digital, Plugin Alliance, Waves, or even PSP now, which put very low prices or subscription models which lower the prices a lot. This one can seem a bit expensive, but you know, that's the Softube strategy, pricing strategy. They never made super cheap stuff, except for a few plugins like Tape, which is quite cheap when it goes on sale. But they got like the TubeTech collection, the CL1B, the EQs that are quite expensive still. It's something that you could expect from Softube, so it's not something I don't like, but some people might not like. But if you go to Softube, you know what you're after. That was my review of the Germanium FET compressor by Softube, emulation of the Chandler Limited. If you have any question about the outboard or whatever else, you can ask me. I'll be happy to answer. And in the meantime, au revoir.